App Service API apps. So far in our series of app service, we have covered how to develop a web app, how to develop a mobile app, and now we want to work with API app. So first we will understand what is API app and what are the benefits. Then we are going to use portal, Azure portal for creation of the API app, deploying an API app, and most important, consuming an API app. Now API apps can also be used in logic app, which we are going to cover in next chapter. But first let us understand what is API app. Before that, what is an API? Application Programming Interface. Some ready-made functionality using which we can build our application. We don't have to go into details of that implementation of functionality. We can just use that functionality in our application. And that is what is API. In simple language, if I say, if you want to phrase a sentence, you need certain words in the dictionary. So dictionary words are used for framing of sentence. Likewise, API is used for developing an application. Those applications can be Windows applications, can be mobile applications, can be web applications, or it can be another API. So what we are going to see here is how to build our own API and host it in Azure so that we can get all the benefits what we have been getting for other types of applications. Whatever benefits we got for, let us say, web apps or mobile apps, same benefits we are going to get even for the API apps. So I repeat in short, some ready-made functionality which we want to provide access to different users in building their applications is what we can achieve using API apps. Now what are the key features of API apps? Bring your API as is. See, whatever API you have developed, now you are going to host it in Azure platform using API apps service. So you do not have to do any kind of changes to that particular app. The API which we have already built can be as it is published with no code changes. Now that API you could have developed in ASP.NET or Java, PHP, Node.js or Python. In all cases, you can just publish it as it is without any changes to them. Yes, API apps can be used with the same SDK as mobile apps. Whatever SDK we have used for consuming as mobile apps, the same thing we can use here. We do not have to go for something different. So you can use API apps not only in Windows application but also in mobile application pretty easily. It provides enterprise grade security. It makes it easy to secure your API. Whatever API you are building, security is one of the major headache. But API apps take care of the complete security layer and it has pretty well integration with Azure Active Directory. So that the third-party application, third-party services can also access them using single sign-on support. They also have support for social integration. That means authentication using Google account or Microsoft account or Facebook account or Twitter account. Somebody can authenticate themselves and access the API app. So the developer of the API app has to do nothing for implementation of security. It's all built in. Simple access control. API apps provide simple access control to your API. With no changes to your code, you can expose API to only the other apps inside your organization or to the public. You can choose actually. Should other apps within the organization only can access it or everybody can access it. Automatic SDK generation. API apps provide a facility where the client-side SDK can be generated on the fly. And this feature is pretty well integrated in Visual Studio also, where you can just provide the URL of the API app and through that URL, the complete SDK, the ready-made set of classes, let us say in C# are going to be generated by Visual Studio. And the same feature is not necessarily restricted to Visual Studio. You have it in Java, JavaScript, and other languages too. So a developer overall doesn't need to take care of the minutities of making API app available to others in a platform independent way. All these things are going to be taken care by the app service API app feature, and we as a developer would only write classes or the relevant functionality and deploy it under the API apps. So let us now see how we can do all these things. Now to create an API app, we have to first create a database in SQL database. Azure SQL database would be required, because that is where I would like to persist my data in the implementation of methods of the API. So let me do that first. Go to Azure portal, and here I have already created a database DSS demo DB under DSS demo server. This I have already performed it. SQL servers, we have got DSS demo server, and we have got DSS demo DB under it. We can configure the firewall and allow current IP. Add IP. Obviously, we will need this connection string at later point of time, and we'll pick it up from there. Now I go to Visual Studio, create a new project, select ASP.NET Web Application, give some name, click on OK, and choose the option here API apps, Azure API apps. A ready-made template is provided. So using Azure API apps, a rich platform for hosting REST APIs, that is very important. What we are actually providing is a REST API to the client. Now we have a basic template created. Now what is this template? How is it different than the regular ASP.NET MVC Web API template? Only one thing is extra in it, that is a NuGet package reference to Swashbuckle is added. That's it. The Swashbuckle provides us Swagger API through which we can provide documentation of the web API. Swagger is a way to provide complete documentation of the functionality which is exposed as REST API. So like we have got WSDL, Web Service Description Language. For SOAP web services, we have got Swagger for REST API. So now what I would like to do is, to the project I would like to add a modal class. Let us add it in modals folder. We'll call it as employee. That means we want to basically provide functionality for employee. Let's say EMP-ID, get and set. Likewise, we have got string name, get and set. We have got public decimal salary, get and set. Now I would like to use entity framework code first model for operating with the database tables. I want database tables to be automatically created. So first we have to add the reference to NuGet package entity framework. And here I'll mark this as a key, and that is under the namespace system.componentModel.data annotations. So this is the primary key. Also we would like to add here a class let's say demo context, which is inherited from the DB context of entity framework system.data.entity. And here we will have DB set for employee. We'll call that as employees. get and set. Now by this name, we have to add a connection string in web.config. Now, for demo purpose, currently I am using local SQL server. With integrated security is equal to true. Eventually, of course, when I publish, I am going to change the connection string. But for the time being, this is good enough for local execution. Now we have the model class, we have got the context, build the application once, and we are ready for generation of a controller. But you will find that there is one controller which is already there, that is values controller. And you can see here it is a web API controller. So yes, as I said earlier, this is nothing but a web API project only, but additional reference to the Swagger, Swashbuckle Swagger is added, and you'll also find one class here, Swagger config. This is also one extra thing, Swagger config register. Now what is that Swagger used for? I'll talk about it little later, but let us see now how to generate a controller. Right click, add controller. Choose the option web API to controller with actions using entity framework. So we already have employee table, employee model, and the context, and click on add. It is going to provide a ready-made piece of code. Scaffolding template has provided ready-made code for all our action methods here. See, we have method for get employees. That means to get all the employees. We are going to get a particular employee. Web API 2, this is response type, put employees, post employee, delete employee, and also there is method to check employees there or not there. And the implementation is all straightforward using the entity framework DB context. In our case, DB context is inherited in demo context. So demo context has been used for implementation, and it's all perfect. We don't have to do anything unless you want to write some additional logic other than insert, update, delete. If you don't want to do that, no need to make any changes here. So yes, it's a straightforward API which is generated in .NET, and we want to publish it as API controller, so that we want to publish it as API app, so that we can get all the benefits of the app service in Azure platform. So how to publish? Now before I publish, I would like to talk a little bit about the Swagger. All these steps I have already completed. So what is Swagger? Using Swashbuckle to Swagger, enable your ASP.NET Web API to REST projects, which in turn provides both human and machine readable documentation automatically. So for our REST API methods, what we have here, we will get the complete documentation of all the methods, their parameters, what is the input to them, and their return type, that is what is the output from them. That complete information we can get it using the Swagger. And of course, it is very similar to that of WHDL provides for web services. So Swagger is a standard documentation for REST API. But this is going to provide us actually with some JSON output. Now that JSON output, in case we want to understand in UI format, and we be able to even perform the operations through the browser itself. That is where we make use of the Swagger UI. Swagger UI allows anyone, be it a development team or the end user, to visualize and interact with the API resources without having any implementation of logic explicitly. We don't need to write logic. we get ready-made UI. It automatically generates from the Swagger specification, the visual documentation, making it easier for backend implementation and client-side consumption. So I want to see now how do we have the Swagger implemented for our ASP.NET. Yes, Azure App Service supports Swagger metadata. For consuming, it uses Swagger metadata. So now we can actually navigate to this URL. First, run the web application and then put this. /swagger/docs/v1. Press enter and we should be able to get some nothing. Let's rebuild it. Yeah, we got it. So actually this is a JSON output. To easily understand this JSON output, we can copy all this, go back to Studio, and here we can create a new file, a text file, which we are going to save it as JSON. Save as JSON first. .json is very important. And when you paste here, it is all indented. So here you see now, we have got employee, an object having properties employee ID, name and salary. Void is also another type. Delete is functionality. This is for values controller. All this you will find even for employees controller on top. This is all for values. Likewise, this is for employees. Operation ID, consumes, produces, JSON output, parameters. So this JSON output, we would like to have it in UI format. That is where we said Swagger UI comes into the picture, for which the URL is /swagger. Just give here /swagger. And we are not able to access it. Something wrong. What is wrong? We have not enabled Swagger UI in our project. For that, go to swaggerconfig.cs and scroll down. We will have a small comment here which we'll have to remove. This one. Just uncomment it. Enable Swagger UI. Nothing else. And save it, rebuild it, go back to browser and again refresh. This time we should get the UI. Let us close and run once again. See, ready-made UI. So this is the UI docs v1 which is consumed, and we have got employees controller and values controller. You can actually go to API/employees. This is how the get method would be. What is it going to return? It's an array of employee objects it is supposed to return. Right now we do not have any data. So even if I click on try it out, I'm going to get blank. It will take little time because first time we are using entity framework code first. So database will be created in the background and we'll get an empty array as the result. You see here, empty array as the result. And these are response headers. Complete documentation of what is the URL, what is the response body, what is the response code, everything is available here. Likewise, we want to now call, let us say, post an employee. I want to add an employee. To add an employee, this is the object which we have to submit as body. So copy and paste that here. Give some values, ID is not required because we know it is auto generated. Name, give something, let's say E1 and some salary. Now say try it out. So this schema is going to be submitted and we get the response here. See, give your E2 and let's say 2000, try it out, we got one more. Now if I go back to the first method and say try it out, those two employees we got it here. So it's a very good UI for testing our API functionality. Is it working fine or not? Everything we are able to do. Like this, you can get a particular employee by its ID. You can edit an employee, delete an employee, all this you are able to perform. So now that our application is ready, we have to publish this in Azure, and for that we'll have to build a client application. Eventually that is the target. So till here we have completed all the steps. Now deploy. Deploy is no different than what we have been doing it since beginning. Right click, publish, Azure App Service, click on new, give a name, employee API app demo, it's good enough. Important is change the type here. By default it is web app. We have to now change it to API app because we are developing API. Resource group, and we can create a new plan. Click on create. It's going to take a while for creation of the API app. Click on next, and here we have to provide the connection string. What is our server? We have to get it from the connection string here. So I selected the database. This is my server name. I'll copy, go back to studio and paste here. Username, the password which I gave at the time of creation of my database, and here we'll leave this blank and let it automatically get created. Or we already have a database, why not choose the same thing? So expand, the database will get listed, DSS demo DB, will use the same thing. Click on next and publish. So your web application is now published as a API app managed by Azure App Service. I repeat, the web application, ASP.NET web application, which was developed using the template web API, more specifically Azure web API app, is now published in Azure platform as a app service. So now again type the same story /swagger and we should get the UI. Perfect. Same thing now, but this time we are working with the server. So let us first add an employee, emp name, or rather name, and salary, JSON object. Try it out. The request is invalid. Employee.name error has occurred. Double quotes is missing. And you see the employee is inserted. You can give a different name. Now try to get We are getting it. Get only one employee, put an ID, and we'll get only one. So this is Swagger UI, which is facilitating all the implementation so that we can invoke the API from the browser itself and test it thoroughly. Now this URL is important. You have to copy this URL, go to the portal. The API app should have been created here. EMP API app demo, and here API definitions, go there and provide the URL. Rather, it's automatically provided there, you don't have to, but in case you see this as blank, you'll have to paste that URL. Whatever is here, this is for localhost. Now this is for the published application. The same URL as it is, you're supposed to give an API definition. API definition lets you configure the location of the Swagger metadata describing your API. This makes it easy for others to discover and consume your API. Note that the URL can be relative or absolute, but must be publicly accessible. The URL should be accessible, and yes, it is accessible here. You can actually see all other options here, which we have been working with app services, like you can provide deployment slots, authentication, authorization, social authentication in case you want to enable, custom domains instead of using the domain which is by default provided in case you want SSL certificate. Scaling features are there. So in short, yes, no doubt it has the same things what we had for mobile apps or web apps in context of app service. Next, I am going to show you how to consume the API app in a client application. For now, that's it.